الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وعملا وقربا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا وأكرمنا ولا تهنا وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وأرضنا وارض عنا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم لك الحمد ولك الشكر ولك المنة. Okay, Bismillah. Okay, Assalamu alaikum once again. So last time we had a look at Ilm Rasm al-Mufti, and these important matters that dictate how positions are categorized and how they are applied in the Hanafi school. So today we're going to just have a look at various other topics that concern the school in general, but what a student needs to know on the outset of the journey to studying the books of the Hanafi school, because like as they say in Damascus, man hafidh al-mutun haz al-ulum. Whoever memorized the mutun of ilm, so like there's a strong focus there on memorizing the poems, the didactic poems, such as Jawharat al-Tawheed and these things. Whoever memorizes them, he attains the sciences, he attains the knowledge of the science. Why? Because you got a distilled summary of the science and its main discussions, right? For example, like in جوهرة التوحيد, right? لكن من التطويل كلت الهمم فصار فيه الاختصار ملتزم, right? As he says that, the books that just became really, expanded. There's so many discussions. So people's himma, people's ability to focus and really master these books, that ability they lost, it became weak. So فصار فيه الاختصار ملتزم. So then summarizing these things became necessary. So they say ومن حفظ المتون حاز العلوم. Whoever memorizes these mutun, he attains these sciences, he got them. ومن قرأ الحواشي فما حواشي. So she here, the second one, is shay, but it's in the Damascus dialect. ومن قرأ الحواشي, and whoever is the hawashi, the hashiyas, فما حوى, like from hawa, to contain something, shay, then he doesn't learn and he doesn't memorize anything, he doesn't learn anything, right? This is for someone who's at the beginning of his knowledge. Otherwise, the hawashi are, one of the most distinct and, key elements of any science. Because the mutun and the shuruh are written in in particular ways, like we said, taqid al-mutlaq and tafsil al-mujmal, these matters. This is what the hawashi do, right? But there are certain things you need to understand, because the hawashi will mention multiple positions, and if you don't know how to read a hashia, then you'll think what's going on. So for example, in Ad-Durr al-Mukhtar, when Imam Haskafi, when he makes, he says, he chooses a position, or he'll say something, and then you look in the hashia and there's no comment on this point. So what does that mean, right? Does in Radd al-Muhtar or the hashia of Tahtawi, the muhashi, is he disagreeing, is he agreeing, does he not know anything about it? And then when you understand how a hashia works, that silence means agreement, because the asl is muwafaqa. The asl is that the muhashi agrees with everything he says, and then where he needs to highlight points, he does so. So that's basically how this matter works with the book. So otherwise, when someone opens up the hashia of, say, for example, the hashia of Ibn Abdin, one of the most important hawashi, known in the Indian subcontinent as Fatawa Shami, and although technically it's not a fatwa work, as in the the description that we gave to the other earlier fatawa work. It's not one of those. It's a later hashia on a sharh, but it's one of the most important texts to read and to be able to navigate. And through reading it, you'll see the depth of what true scholarship is. It's not just a case of, right, I've done my 5 years, I've done my 7 years, right? No, it's a lifetime of learning, understanding, critique, building, many things, right? Many things. And he teaches you how to do this as well. Many points says, if you go think about this point, that more could be said. So this is how it works with the Hawashi of the school. So what we have next, what we have today is we're going to have a discussion on firstly what we talked about, the tabaqat of the fuqaha. And so let's just see. So the two main points of discussion will be on the scholars of the school, which is what we call the tabaqat al-fuqaha, and the books. And why do we need to understand the discussion on the scholars? Because knowing what a faqih is, we're not going to break down the definition, but knowing the rank of certain scholars makes a big difference on how you approach their works, right? I mean, for example, one of when it comes to tarjih, one of the strongest figures you have in the madhab is Imam al-Marghinani, or al-Marginani, as they say in some places. So his tashih and his tarjih holds a lot of weight, right? And all of his works are valuable, like al-Tajnis al-Mazid and the Hidayah, Bidayat al-Mubtadi. They have their worth. So what we have initially is this discussion on the tabaqat al-fuqaha, and one of the first people to lay out is Ibn Kamal Basha, right? His tabaqat work is, I think it's about roughly, was it 400 years ago? So his tabaqat work is a categorization of the scholars of the madhab up until his time. And you've got giants that came before him, like Ibn Humam and many others of the later scholars, and then clearly the earlier scholars of the school. Now his work is, as a scholar, mashallah, right? He's got a lot of sorry, where is this? He's got a lot of beneficial works, and in general, Ibn Kamal's works, he's got like a nice compilation of his Rasail. We talked a bit about these last week, but this text on the tabaqat has been criticized by a number of scholars. So we've got it's been quoted by a number of people. One of the people that quoted it was Al-Imam Muhammad Amin ibn Abidin in his Sharh Uqud Rasm al-Mufti. Uqud Rasm al-Mufti is a poem on the adab of ifta, written by one of his teachers. So he commented on, he wrote a sharh on it, and this is something that many like if you go to do a course on ifta, it's one of the things that you study. The masail are expanded and expounded in many places. For example, in the muqaddim of the hashia of Rad al-Muhtar, there's a discussion on it. There's many other works on this. A useful one on it is for various aspects, not everything. A useful one on it is a text called Is'ad al-Mufti, which is a tahqiq of it and an expansion of its discussions by one of the scholars I studied with, Dr. Salah Abul Hajj. That's a useful one. It's in print, it's available, and there are some useful points on it. So Ibn Kamal Basha's tabaqat, it has a number of issues with it, and so Ibn Abidin quoted it, which and you have to understand that scholars, especially when someone's doing like a huge work, right? When they do, they have a lot of projects on, or the work that they're doing is broad in scope. So if you look at the Hashia of Ibn Abidin, the old Bulaq print, and if you're going to buy that, the edition to get is the old Bulaq print, but because that's where all the references will be ascribed to. If you open up a book and it says the Hashim ibn Abdin, volume 3, page 200, it's referring to the old print, right? And that's a skill you need to develop to be able to read these older prints. So what happens is, let me just check. Yeah. So what happens is, um, when he was writing the text, for example, there's a process, what they call the mubayyada and the muswadda. So the muswadda is basically the first draft of any text, right? And then once they've written it, then they go back and they refine it, right? That's how it's generally done. If you look at the Hashi of Ibn Abdin, it's printed in so the first 5 volumes um, are his work, and then there's a takmila, right? And by his son. And but if you look, I think from volume 5, the standard is not the same as it was in the first 4 volumes. Not saying that he hasn't done a good job at all, no, but because he passed away before he was able to refine that volume, rahimahullah ta'ala. The same, for example, if you look at the tafsir of Imam al-Alusi, when he's commenting on issues, many a time, a matter will come up, a discussion will come up, and he'll say, وَفِي الْقَلْبِ مِنْهُ شَيْءٍ. Right? There's something that it doesn't quite sit right with me, but then he moves on. Why? Because he had this thing that I've got this methodology, I'm writing this work, and I need to complete it. So if you don't complete it, then obviously incomplete works don't benefit people as much as complete works do, right? Which is natural. For example, this book right there where my finger's pointing, that tafsir is an excellent tafsir by Shaykh Abdul-Rahim Reasat, right, who passed away just a couple of decades ago. What an excellent tafsir. He wrote a 1-volume work on the Qawa'id of Tadabbur, how to reflect on the Quran, and then based on those principles he wrote this tafsir. And unfortunately, so what he did, he decided to use a different tartib. So the structure that he uses is that he did. So Imam As-Suyuti and others, they mention a rough guide to which surahs were revealed first. Although it's not absolute, but it's a good rough guide. So he started with the Meccan surahs. Starts with Surah Al-Alaq, even though part of it was revealed later. Then the Fatiha, and he goes through it like that. And he passed away just after getting onto Surah Al-Baqarah, so the book is incomplete, right? Maybe someone will complete it one day, according to this methodology. But it's like that, right? So anyway, so even sometimes a scholar doesn't have time to go into every single thing. It's not a critique on Imam Muhammad Amin ibn Abidin. So he did quote the Tabaqat of Ibn Kamal Basha. However, there have been others that came after him, right? And they critiqued the text, and they highlighted errors within the text, and they've done us a favor, right? It's well worth knowing this when you go into a text, in order to understand the benefits and the potential places where you could slip, right? So the text is it's good as a foundation for what it was, but then scholars that came after did refine it. Although there's no absolute work on tabaqat even up until our time. There are people who have made suggestions. So some people have revised Ibn Kamal Basha's breakdown. Others have just quoted it just straight. Some have revised it. Some have suggested other arrangements, such as Dr. Salah. He has an arrangement where he suggests that we look at the tabaqat of the scholars from a chronological order, right? So the earlier ones having more authority than the later ones, but that's even that can be debated. That's debatable, because how many later scholars surpasses those that have come before him, right? Because his assumption is that as time progresses, there's more knowledge, right? For example, the people of our generation will have to learn everything that's come before, including what the research and the conclusion of the generation before us was, and those that come after we'll have to look at what our generation did. So it's like that. So knowledge increases. So it's not necessary that someone that comes later is always going to be inferior in knowledge or rank or whatever to someone that's earlier. But in any case, so what's going on? So when it comes to the books of the tabaqat, the strata of the scholars, you've got the first criticism on this work was the work of Imam Shihabuddin Harun al-Marjani, right? And he's from Russia, you know, he's from modern day Russia, where Habib, the MMA fighter, and these people are from that kind of area. And it's interesting. What's this book about? It's called Nadhuratul Haqq, and as I mentioned last time, Nadhura is the word that they use to describe. It's a telescope. And so he says ناظرة الحق في فرضية العشاء وإن لم يغب الشفق. So he's talking about the obligation of Isha, even in places where the twilight doesn't disappear, right? And this is a complicated mas'ala, right? A very complicated mas'ala based on, so what some people did. There's a position of an early imam of the school who says, look, there's no night, quote unquote night. So because the twilight doesn't disappear, so there's no Isha. And many people in his location did follow this, and he said, look, you're wrong, right? And he argues very strongly, and he in fact it's a convincing argument. He proves it that no, Isha is obligatory. And then there's a whole issue of taqdeer and whatever. We face it here in the summer months as well. So but the early part of this text, there's some muqaddimat, and like I said, he has this kind of the nafas salafi, as we say, right? Like the approach of the Salafis when it comes to the Ammi, looking up ahkam. So there's a bit of confusion in the text, but what you'll get is the introduction is very good and a good overview of the school. And when it comes to the actual fiqh discussion of the mas'ala, ajada wa ataba, right? Fantastic what he did. Had he expanded more on the potentials of the means of taqdeer, the work would have been, absolutely fantastic in this. But it's unrivaled in this field. And you can see the strength of his scholarship. And one of the things that does come through is his understanding of the ulama and the fuqaha of the Hanafi school and who they are and where their ranks are. So what he did is he had an issue with the tabaqat of Ibn Kamal Basha, right? So this work is well worth getting. It was printed by Darul Fath, and I'm sure it's available here in England. It's definitely worth acquiring. So, and then you've got Maulana Abdul Hayy al-Laknawi, radiyallahu anhu wa ardahu, we talked about last week. So in his entry, so he talks about the tabaqat and the books of the school in a number of works, but he's got a short summary of it all in the introduction to Umdatul Ri'ayah. And Umdatul Ri'ayah, it's so this edition, it's unfortunately it's a Darul Kutub Ilmi edition, but I can vouch for most of the contents. That it was the tahqiq was done by Dr. Salah, once again, the scholar who I studied with. Alhamdulillah. So he actually did his PhD on Sharh al-Wiqaya. So it was a good 2-volume edition. And then so he did a tahqiq on this, and just having it in a modern print is such a big blessing, let alone the value of the book in and of itself. Umdatul Ri'ayah, it's the old Indo-Pak, Hajari print, as they say. It's difficult to read, right? So, and I had one, it was kind of blurry as well. It wasn't easy to read. So this is a blessing. There are a few typos which we found, but that's normal. That's human endeavor. But so in the introduction, Imam al-Laknawi talks about the tabaqat, and he has a criticism of it, right? And another place where it's discussed is Husn al-Taqadi. Husn al-Taqadi is by Sheikh Zahid al-Kawthari, and it's the biography of Al-Imam Abu Yusuf al-Qadi, right? Radiallahu anhum ajma'in. And so it's discussed there. What we can do is, yeah, what we can do is, let's just have a quick look at what Ibn Kamal actually says about the tabaqat, and then we'll have a look at the works of the school. So what is he saying about the tabaqat, right? Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong section. This. Just bear with me, please. The problem. That's the problem preparing for multiple books. You close them. اللهم لك الحمد ولك الشكر. Yeah, okay. So what Ibn Kamal Basha, let's just quickly look at what he says, and we'll have a quick look at some of the critique of what he said. So Ibn Kamal Basha, he says there are 7 tabaqat, 7 strata, 7 levels. And then he says, first of all, the tabaqat al-mujtahidin fi shara', right? The mujtahid mutlaqs. And he says, like the 4 imams, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik al-Shafi'i, and Imam Ahmad, right? And he said, what they did, what their role was, ta'sis al-qawaid. How do we approach the sacred text of the Quran, the Sunnah? How do we derive rulings? So they laid down these principles, right? And they derived rulings without following anyone else. But technically, there is something that we'll find, that a lot of the big discussions in the in the schools, between the 4 schools, a lot of the time you'll find that these ikhtilafat go back to the Sahaba, right? So technically they're not fresh rulings. For example, can you sell walad? Like you've said to, like someone's had a child from his slave, technically she's entitled to freedom after his passing, but if you sold her, can he sell her? So there's the ikhtilaf that goes right back to the Sahaba, right? So this is the first thing that he said. Then he said, الطبقة الثانية طبقة المجتهدين في المذهب. Mujtahids, but in the madhab, such as Abu Yusuf and Muhammad and the other students of Abu Hanifa, who are able to derive rulings based on the principles of their teacher. So there's an issue here. We're going to look at this, right? And he says that even though they might disagree with him in some of the furu', they follow his usul. That's the second tabaqa. So mujtahideen fil madhab. Then he says there's a tabaqa of the mujtahideen fil masail, right? The mujtahideen in the masail of the school, meaning that when there's no narration of a mas'ala from the imam, these people can derive something, from there, in this issue based on the imam, what the imam says, such as Imam al-Khassaf, Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi, Abu al-Hasan al-Karhi, right? And Shamsul Imam al-Halwani, who came much later. Yeah, subhanallah. So, remember, a lot of this is, there's a question mark around this. Shamsul A'imma al-Sarakhsi, Fakhrul Islam al-Bazdawi, Qadi Khan, and others. It says they can't go against the Imam, neither in the usul nor in the furu', but they can derive rulings with the Imam's usul in matters that the Imam hasn't commented on, right? Then he says the 4th tabaqa is ashab al-takhrij min al-muqallideen, right? That people that can use the Imam's position to do takhrij, which is basically, here you've got an asl or you've got a mas'ala, and then based on that principle you can derive other furu' from it based on the principles. And in this category he puts people like Imam al-Jassas, right? And he's saying that they're not able to do ijtihad aslan, right? And but because their grasp of the usul and the furu and the qawaid of particular abwab, they're able to derive more furu', right? And he places in this also, um, yeah, the author of the Hidayah, and like when he says, for example, sorry, like he says that, as when the author of the Hidayah, when he says kada fi takhrij al-karhi and kada fi takhrij al-razi, right? And then he says the fifth one is a tabaqa of the ashab al-tarjih min al-muqallidin. So he says like people like Sahib al-Hidayah, right? Imam Ali ibn Abi Bakr al-Marghinani and Abu al-Hussein al-Quduri. The big issue here, because uh, we're certain that Imam al-Quduri has a much higher rank than even the author of the Hidayah. And so then he says, so these people do هذا أولى هذه رواية, أصح الروايات, and they say these kind of they do ترجيح in this way. Then he says طبقة المقلدين القادرين على تمييز بين الأقوى والقوي والضعيف وظاهر الرواية وظاهر المذهب, right? So the people who wrote the main mutun, right? Like Imam al-Nasafi and Imam al-Mawsili and these people, right? So, and then the last one, he says, طبقة المقلدين الذين لا يقدرون على ما ذكر. Right? These people who can't do this, but rather, so these people they're the people that are not capable of any of these matters. And in some of the commentators, they talk about when he said, he says a few more things, but he says those who just quote anything and everything. Because there are books in the school, as we'll see, there are books in the school where certain of the ulama, they quoted any sort of position, strong, weak, they don't know who it's from or whatever, they would do all of this. So what are the issues? Why did people disagree with him? Okay, so the first issue is that he says that Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad are not mujtahideen, right? And also he includes Imam al-Zufar, Hassan ibn Ziyad al-Lu'lu'i. This is incorrect. So we've got Ibn Abidin, who himself says in his Hashia that the Sahibain were both mujtahid mutlaqs, right? And a number of scholars, like Imam al-Marjani here, he he writes a couple of pages on this point, and with quotes from the Salaf and many people, that no, they were both mujtahid mutlaqs. Each of them, even Imam Zufar and others, they were both mujtahids. But like you have, for example, let me just give you a crude example. In martial arts, people train, you have I don't even know the sequence of the belts, but let's say you have the white belt and the yellow belt and the blue belt and whatever, and then they get to black belt, right? And there's a recognition. Someone that has reached this level, right, is a black belt, he's competent with this particular set of skills, right? And that's basically what it's saying. Yet, beyond the black belt, other levels, yes, first dan, second dan in karate, for example, right? There are ranks higher. So just because you're at a level, it doesn't mean that there can't be differences, right? تِلْكَ الرُّسُلُ فَضَّلْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, He chose the messenger of Allah and gave him superiority over other messengers. You got the ulul azmi min al-rusul. So it's like that even amongst the messengers, alayhim as-salatu wasalam. So here what we have is, even amongst the mujtahideen, you have Abu Hanifa, for example, and his ijtihad and his understanding, honestly, there was no one like him at all. So as a mujtahid, he's stronger than his students. As a mujtahid, he's stronger than Imam Malik. As a mujtahid, he's stronger than Imam Shafi'i, right? But yeah, are they all capable of doing their own ijtihad? Yes, right? In individual masail, could they have a deeper, perspective, another approach that might be superior in this masala? Yes, that's possible, right? Even his own students. But is he a mujtahid? Yes. As were the Sahibain, they were both mujtahids. Actually, even Zufar and the others. Now, so to say that they're just people who follow his usul, and they can do some ijtihad in istinbat, with his usul is an injustice to them, right? As we see that, for example, Abu Zayd al-Dabusi, one of the earlier authors of the Hanafi school around the 4th, 5th century, he's got a short book, right? I believe my friend Sheikh Hussein, Sheikh Suhail Hanif, I believe he started teaching it. He might have done a lesson or two on YouTube. But it's a short book, and it's called Ta'sisul Nazar, and he discusses the difference of the usul of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Muhammad, and Imam Abu Yusuf. Imam Abu Yusuf was much more, he was much more likely to accept the zahir of a hadith than, even though he's still one of the, Ashab al-Ra'i, his approach was different slightly to that of Abu Hanifa. So why did they support his school? Right? Because he was their teacher, right? And because of his preeminence and how much they loved and respected him, that after that, yes, they mentioned their own positions, right? But as a school, they promoted his school, right? So, the blessing that we got from this is we don't just say, like the Shafi'is say, right? There's no partisanship here. Alhamdulillah, Allah reward them all. But the Shafi'i madhab has al-Qadim and al-Jadid, when he was still in Iraq, and then when he moved to Egypt, right, he changed a lot of his positions. Imam Ahmad's school has similar things, right? And where he changed positions. So, but instead of just having one mujtahid to base all your positions off, we've got a school that has, at least 5, right? Imam Abu Hanifa, the Sahibain, Imam Zufar, Hassan ibn Ziyad al-Lu'lu'i. There's a lot of scope within the school, right? So saying that they're not mujtahids is a big disservice. So Imam Marjani has talks a lot about this, and they're not any less than Imam Malik and the others. In fact, one of the early Muslims said that in Abu Yusuf's time, after the passing of Abu Hanifa, when Abu Yusuf was the main teacher of his school, no one was ahead of him in terms of knowledge, right? And so then he said that Imam al-Tahawi is a muqallid, and that Imam al-Tahawi cannot do Imam al-Tahawi was a mujtahid muntasib, just like the others. Yes, they might have been slightly stronger in the ijtihad and these things, but what was it? It's someone who's independently capable of ijtihad, but following, either because there's a long discussion around this. Why do they follow? Is it because their ijtihad agrees with the ijtihad of so and so, or because out of deference, they're following that? So we leave that issue. But that's basically it. So Imam Marjani mentions this, right? The Imam al-Tahawi is, he is a mujtahid, but not in this, he is a mujtahid, but he's a muntasib. And then he talks about, Imam Abu Bakr al-Razi al-Jassas. He put him in like, a really low category. No, Imam Jassas is huge, right? He's like, if he's no less than Imam al-Karhi and Imam al-Tahawi, right? Subhanallah. That's why, like you said, that's why he disagrees with Imam Abu Hanifa in many of the furu'. So just these things to bear in mind when you're reading the tabaqat, that if you see something quoted directly, if quoted directly from his book on tabaqat, you have to be careful. One of the things he puts Qadi Khan higher than Imam al-Marghinani, the author of the Hidayah. So he says, مطلب في أن صاحب الهداية ليس بدون قاضي خان بل هو أجل منه. He's saying that the author of the Hidayah is greater in terms of his rank and his foothold and his grasp of the school and his the skills required for tarjih. One of the things that the ulama mention is why did he do this? So they say basically that if you look at, you've got the ulama of Samarkand, I can't even say the English word, transaxoanius. It's just ma wara an-nahr, as they say. So Afghanistan, higher than Afghanistan, between Afghanistan and China, these areas, and Bukhara and these places, and even further east, they had this trend to aggrandize their ulama, right? Which is fine, to give someone a title so that the Muslims will respect and revere them. This is Shamsul A'imma, from all the Imams, he's the sun, right? These sorts of things, right? And whereas the ulama of the East, of the more Western ulama, actually, let's just say, like for example, yeah. So the more Western ulama, they will say قال الجصاص, قال الرازي, قال الطحاوي, right? قال زفر. They'll just use their names or maybe their kunya, but they won't give them these grand titles, right? Sadru Sharia and all of these things. So someone that isn't so some of the scholars have said that Ibn Kamal Basha wasn't aware uh, of the extent of this, so he didn't realize that you could have someone that is much higher than anyone that's come after him, right? Like Imam al-Jassas, but then you'll see people that are lower than him with huge titles, right? So Burhanuddin and these things. So there was a bit of confusion. So and what he was doing he was a mufti, right? So he was reading these works of fatwa, and they're quoting someone with this title and someone with that title, and then they're quoting this person with like this. And usually what you'll do, you'll quote your peers. People quote their peers, or they'll talk about them with just their name because they're their peers, right? So there was some kind of mistake in that. So that's one thing. There are a couple of others. To answer this, not a Rasmal Mufti course. So, um, uh, some of the things that you could say is that another thing is that he says someone's a mujtahid fil masail and someone is ashab al-takhrij and someone is from the ashab al-tarjih. No, these are roles. Just like, for example, when a teacher if someone teaches fiqh, you could say he's a faqih. When he's teaching hadith, he's a muhaddith, right? So when he's teaching tafsir, he's a mufassir. So it's roles, and they're not mutually exclusive. Someone could have all of these things. Imam al-Laknawi, Allah. Imam al-Laknawi, if you read the introduction to Umdat al-Ri'ayah, he mentioned a number of things about certain of the ulama being, having more skills in tarjih and ijtihad than others. Let us call it, this is sufficient, right? Just to have an understanding of what is being said, and this discussion of the tabaqat of the fuqaha. And so we might highlight a few of the things as we continue the text. But what we have is an understanding that there are levels to of the fuqaha, and they have certain roles. And like I said, a lot can be said about the categorization. We will leave that until this point. We'll talk about what's relevant to us, inshallah. So the next thing we want to discuss is the books of the school. There are two types of works, right? There's the relied upon books, right? And then the unreliable works. Generally, you'll find, as they say, ما فيه المتون مقدم على ما في الشروح وما في الشروح مقدم على ما في الفتاوى. That's what they'll say. That the mutun come first, because why? They're transmitting the the madhab of the mujtahid, and then you have the shuruh, which is the shuruh to the earlier texts, and then you have because the shuruh are expanding on this, and then you have the fatawa, right? And because they don't, sometimes it's pure ijtihad from some of the later scholars. So when it comes to the transmission of the school and selecting a position for fatwa, precedence is given. You look in the mutun first, right? That's going to be the strongest, and then in the shuruh, and then the fatawa, right? So in general, there are other considerations, but that's sufficient for now. And so the books that are in the school, the al-kutub al-mu'tamada, or you could say al-kutub al-mu'tabara, right? And the ulama talks about the maqbool and the mardud books, and it's important to know what's going on with the maqbool and the mardud books, right? And why a book is maqbool and why a book is mardud. And in generally, Allah. there's a lot we can say. There's a lot of books. We will go through some names. Let's just have a quick look at why books are maqbula. So first of all, the maqbula is they only narrate the mu'tamad in general. You could have a text which is a sound, reliable text, like the Matan of Quduri, right? It narrates the position of the Imam, does the purpose of a matan. It will narrate the mu'tamad, but then he has a few choices where he's not relating, the mu'tamad position, or he goes against the Imam, but then what he chooses actually turns out to be the mu'tamad. It's an interesting thing. So why are they accepted? So this is what they do in general. They narrate the relied upon sound position, right? That's the first thing. Secondly, they do not transmit weak positions, right? You'll have a number of texts that you open it and it's got some sound and some weak positions and this and the other, and what you'll find is you can't approach the text with comfort and ease. And for example, you can go to the Hidayah, open it up and just be comfortable. Whatever he's going to say is going to be sound and relied upon, right? There might be ikhtilaf in the tarjih, which is not an issue. Do you have to give zakat on horses or not, right? Some of the ulama will say this and some of the others will say that. We'll see in the Lubab. And so that's different to opening a text where the author quotes anything and everything, and yes, there might be, you don't have the same thiqah, you don't have the same trust in the text, and you have to be very careful. You've got to check and double check everything, right? So that's also another thing these books do. They don't transmit weak positions, right? The next one is they're clear in their expression. It might be a difficult one in terms of, like, the Hidayah is not an easy book, and there's a lot packed into the text, but when you read the text, and you can, it's possible to read the Hidayah and understand the Hidayah. Let's say someone is aware of the Masail and the Ikhtilafat, they can read the Hidayah, understand the Mas'ala clearly from its text, 99% of the time, for example, right? And for there not to be any other issues or confusion after this, right? It's possible. Whereas we'll look at with the weaker texts and the Mardud text, that sometimes it's not, well, no, I won't say mardud, but the ghair mu'tamad texts, where it's not easy you can't just open up the book, right, and read, because it's difficult to read, and we'll talk about why there, inshallah. And then you have, the rank of the author. As we've just said, bal huwa ajallu minhu, the Imam al-Marghinani and these people, even those that come later, right? When you look at some of these texts and you see that the author, the depth of his understanding, his grasp of the masail, you can with confidence say, yes, this is a relied upon sound book. Is there absolutely no chance of them making a slip? No, right? But the vast majority of the masail, and this is why we train and we study with the fuqaha, we study with teachers, so we learn all of these things. A lot of the times, for example, if you're reading the Hashib Ibn Abidin, Imam Ibn Abidin used to study, Al-Bahr al-Ra'iq. So a lot of his tahqiqat and a lot of the discussion, he discusses al-Bahr al-Ra'iq, and he makes corrections and amendments. That's why we have later books. That's why the endeavor of fiqh is continuous, right? Does it make al-Bahr al-Ra'iq useless or worthless? No, not at all, right? بل هو كتاب معتبر, as Ibn Abidin says himself, right? So and then we have, perhaps the biggest point is the acceptance of the ulama, like Imam al-Lakhnawi says, as actually one of the early scholars, he says, الناس أعقل من أن يمدحوا ما ليس فيه فضائل, or something to that effect. People are too intelligent to praise something that isn't good, that doesn't have virtues. So Imam al-Lakhnawi says the fact that the scholars read these books and teach these books and comment on these books, and the endeavor continues on these works, and so students know about them. All of these matters, show the worth and the value of this book, and it's a sign of acceptance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's just have a quick look. So obviously, which books are mu'tamada, mu'tabara? I'm going to read out a list. We're going to discuss some of the works, but does it mean that you want to look up a mas'ala? Okay, what's the hukum of the takbir in witr in the third rak'ah after you've recited the Fatiha and some more ayat or surah, right? Is it is it wajib? Is it mustahab? What's the hukum of it? Are you going to go open up Kitab al-Mabsut by Imam Muhammad, or you're going to go to a more accessible work, right, that's closer to our time, like Maraq al-Falah with the Hashir Imam al-Tahtawi, or you're going to go to Radd al-Muhtar. So so anyway, so the books that are mu'tabara, obviously the 6 books of Zahir al-Riwayah we talked about the other day, the mutun of the school. So al-Kafi by al-Hakim al-Shahid, right, early work. The Mukhtasar al-Karhi, the Mukhtasar al-Tahawi, Mukhtasar al-Quduri, Bidayat al-Mubtadi, the Matan of the Hidayah, al-Wiqaya, I'm talking about how they're all connected, al-Kanz, al-Mukhtar, al-Majma', مجمع البحرين وملتقى النيرين by Ibn Sa'ati, النقاية, which is the talkhis of al-Biqaya, al-Multaqa, so which is a sharh, right? The Multaqa al-Abhur. Yeah, no, sorry. He's categorized in a different way. It's مجمع البحرين وملتقى النيرين. That's it, like that. تحفة الفقهاء, I believe. تحفة الفقهاء we talked about. منية المصلي, which was an early work. In fact, it was the text that first gained a lot of attention for the ahkam of the salah. منية المصلي وغنية I forgot the second half of the title. Allah. Anyway, so it has some important shuruh. So Halbatul Mutajalli, although Ibn Abidin in the Rad al-Muhtar he calls it al-Hilya, but it's actually al-Halba. Halbatul Mutajalli, and there is a text which is well worth getting by the contemporary Jordanian scholar Dr. Lu'ay al-Khalili, called La'ali ul-Mihar, right? La'ali ul-Mihar is a good 2-volume work where he gives a short bio and reference and discussion on each of the works Al-Allama Muhammad ibn Abidin referenced in his Hashiyah Radd al-Muhtar. It's an excellent work. You can get it from the main bookstores and book sites. Published by Dar al-Fath. La'ali, plural of lu'lu', La'ali ul-Mihar fi Masadir ibn Abidin, or something to that effect. Its title is. And then you got the category of books called the Mabsutat. So a book which has a title of Al-Mabsut, Mabsut al-Sarakhsi, the Mabsut of al-Bazdawi, the Mabsut of which is Khawahir Zada. And then you got the Muhitat, another category of books with that same name. Al-Muhit al-Ridawi by Radiyuddin al-Sarakhsi, Al-Muhit al-Burhani, which these 2 texts were not in print, so especially the Al-Muhit al-Burhani, some of the ulama actually, like Imam Ibn Abidin, he classed it as a work that's not relied upon, because it wasn't in print in its time. In our time, it's been printed twice. I think there's a Lebanese print, and maybe I think there's a Pakistani or an Indian print. And Imam al-Lakhnawi, he says in his Muqaddim of Umdat al-Ri'ayah that he found it, he found a manuscript of it, and he read it, and he said it's an excellent work. People assume that it just be someone that's quoting everything left, right, and center, but no, there's a lot of tahqiq and tanqih involved in the authorship of this work. So it's an excellent work, massive work. Probably something to get the PDF. Okay, then like I said, the shuruh of the school, like the Sharh of Tahawi by Isbijabi, Jassas al-Sharh of Tahawi. So these are some of the earlier works. The Sharh of Aqta', which he quotes in the Lubab quite a lot. Al-Hidayah, Bada'i' al-Sana'i' al-Wafi. Al-Kafi, which is a Sharh al-Wafi by An-Nasafi, not the author of the Kanz. Sharh al-Wiqaya, Tabeen al-Haqa'iq, which I mentioned, is an excellent text. Kitab Mu'tabar, we'll talk about it again. Al-Inaya, Al-Ikhtiyar, Radd al-Muhtar, as we mentioned. So, so these are like the books from, the school. Some are very early works, so if you see them being referenced, that that these works are being referenced for good reason. But which books are you likely to come across today, if you open up a contemporary book, or if you open up Ibn Abdin or these other works, and there's a discussion going on, and if this person's quoted, some of the most likely books you'll come across is, first, like I said, Al-Mabsut, right, of Imam al-Sarakhsi, in print, 10 volumes, large work, amazing text, right? The scholars, Tarsusi, one of the scholars after him, he said, لا يعمل بما يخالفه, that you don't apply anything which is against what's in Al-Mabsut of Sarakhsi. ولا يركن إلا إليه ولا يفتى ولا يعول إلا عليه, because he's quoting, he's summarizing the books of Zahir al-Riwayah. So anything that goes against it is clearly a weak riwayah. And Imam al-Sarakhsi, he wrote, well, they say he was he was in prison. He's imprisoned, and they say he was in a well. He was lowered into a well, and he was imprisoned there. And he dictated the book to one of his students who had come to visit him, and he wrote it down. And Imam Sarakhsi is a huge alim of the Hanafi school. In fact, his work, even in Usul al-Fiqh, right, Usul al-Sarakhsi, is in print, 2 volumes. That was basically Imam al-Nasafi, when he wrote Al-Manar fil Usul, basically he's just expanded upon, and he expounded the Usul of Imam al-Sarakhsi. Then he wrote his own sharh on it, Kashf al-Asrar. And Sheikh Faraz told me that Sheikh Hassan al-Hindi said that it's the best of the shuruh of the Manar. I know most people now study Nur al-Anwar, which is excellent, right? But I've looked at a number of sections of Kashf al-Asrar by Imam al-Nasafi. Very clear, very, very clear, well organized, excellent sharh. There's a big difference when you read that compared to when you read some of the other shuruh, like the sharh of Ibn Nujaym or Ibn Malak. It's an excellent work. And obviously that inspired the other usul books after him. So he's got a great position. So and then you've got Al-Muhit al-Ridawi, which is also in print. Tabeen al-Haqa'iq, as I said, Imam Ibn Abidin said, وَهُوَ شَرْحٌ مُعْتَمَدٌ مَقْبُولٌ. Is it the case that every single mas'ala in it is, absolute? No. 95%, 99%, right? Because I do recall a couple of places in the Hashia where he's supported a position other than what's in Tabeen al-Haqa'iq. But, generally, is it a mu'tamad, relied upon school work? Absolutely. And I think it's one of the best works, honestly. It is a sharh of the Hidayah. You might say Tabeen al-Haqa'iq sharh Kanz al-Daqa'iq, but it's actually Tabeen al-Haqa'iq sharh al-Hidayah wa Kanz al-Daqa'iq. He follows the matan of the Kanz, but like we said, Kanz has a relationship with the Hidayah and in the Talkhis of the Masail. But his ta'leel, he's very strong, very, very strong in Hadith, right? Uthman ibn Ali ibn Mihjan al-Zayla'i, who's the nephew of the author of Nasb al-Raya. Sheikh Muhammad Awama did an excellent tahqiq of that. It's out of print, I believe, but the PDF is available online. So the hadith of the Hidayah, and it's a very solid foundation, the hadith of school. But Tabeen al-Haqa'iq is excellent work, right? And the old print is particularly good as well. So so then what else will you see? There's the works Usul al-Bazdawi, and you see that quoted a lot in various works. Imam al-Laknawi says that's the Kitab Nafis Mu'tamad. Munyatul Musalli, and you've got its 2 shuruh, right, by Ibn Amir al-Hajj, and so that's an important one. Halbatul Mutajalli, and then there's a sharh by al-Halabi. So there's one called Halabi Saghir, so you can get it as a Turkish print, and Halabi Kabir, 2 separate works, right? It was before Nur al-Idah came and took over. It was the text for the furu'. Kashf al-Asrar, Sharh Usul al-Bazzawi. This is referenced and quoted a lot. So, for example, there's a long discussion on this. For example, in the mas'ala of if you've missed a prayer, do you have to make it up? Yes. What if the time has elapsed, right? So the position of the door, and it's a good sound position, is if the time has passed, you don't have to make it up. But then Al-Imam Ibn Abidin, he quotes Kashf al-Asrar, I believe, a long section from it. And then so he shows that, look, the ihtiyat and the sound position is that even after the time, right, has passed, you make it up. So, Al-Dhakhir al-Burhani, again, Al-Muhit al-Burhani, we talked about that. It's in print now, right? So it's, Radd al-Muhtar, right? It's, Imam al-Lakhnawi said, وَهُوَ حَاشِيَةٌ نَفِيسَةٌ مَقْبُولَةٌ. And there are a couple of works on it. So there's Jidd al-Mumtar by Imam Ahmad Rida Khan. So that's in print, I believe. I think it's in 6 or 7 volumes. It was printed in the UAE a few years ago. So that's a nice clear print. The older print isn't as useful. And a lot of it is just, istidrakat, so I remember there's one point where Ibn Abidin, he says, قال في شرعة الإسلام, but it's actually in the sharh of the شرعة الإسلام. So he highlights some of these things. There are a few mabahith and a few discussions. And what I really liked about it, I was reading it, and this whole mas'ala just related to this of Nadhiratul Haqq. And Imam Ahmad Rida Khan, he made a mistake on this point, because they're saying that the twilight doesn't disappear in the summer months, and based on his understanding of astronomy and these things, he said no, it shouldn't be the case that these riwayat are they're mistaken, because that is in a place where the sun, the twilight would disappear. So he disregarded it. But then the muhaqqiq, the editor of the work, this is what we call insaf, someone who's fair. Obviously, he's done tahqiq of the work because he likes the value of the work, but he's also fair in saying, look, actually, there's a mistake here simply because based on X, Y, and Z factor, it is there, right? It is the case the twilight doesn't disappear. But that's that. You have the taqrirat of Rafi'i, which in most editions are also printed with it. But in the old Egyptian edition, they're in a separate volume. Okay, Al-Hidayah Al-Kafi, which is Lil-Hakim, and then Al-Kafi Sharh Al-Wafi by Abdullah ibn Ahmad Al-Nasri. That is Abu al-Barakat. My mistake earlier, I said he wasn't the author of the matan. He is the author of the matan. Bada'i al-Sana'i'. And then you've got, Al-Lubab, Fath al-Qadir, these other works that we've mentioned. I won't go through all of them, but these other works are also useful. Sometimes in some of the later works, you'll find, because the methodology was adapted, that's not a discussion for today, but these works do have their merit and value. And sometimes in some of the later works, you will find scholars introduce positions based on other than the usul of the initial usul of the school, but the madhab adapted. So I'm not going to go further into that. But so yeah, Allah. So then you've got, so these are the main works, right? But then you've got the shuruh of the Hidayah, all of them, mu'tamad books. You've got the Durr al-Hukam, and all the shuruh that we talked about, the Ikhtiyar, and these works, the works of Imam Ashur Bulali. Generally, the books that are what they call al-mutadawala, those books that are that are in the hands of students, that are in the hands of the ulama, are great. We have an issue now, which is about books that were not very well known, right? Or, for example, where the author isn't known, but they're in print now. So what, alhamdulillah, there's a huge movement now in Turkey and in other places where many of the manuscripts that were available are, are being printed, right? And and some of the works are fantastic, like the book I mentioned a couple of lessons ago, Kamal al-Diraya wa Riwaya Kamal al-Diraya wa Jam'u Riwaya wa Diraya. I believe Izmiri, I believe he's the one who's got Mullah Khusro has a sharh. Sorry, Mullah Khusro has a book on usul, and Imam al-Izmiri has got a sharh on it. And I believe I've lost my copy, but I did have it. Anyway, alhamdulillah. Anyway, so what happens is, so that's an excellent work, but it wasn't in print until very recently. I've ordered a book recently called Khalijul Bihar, right? It wasn't in print. There's a book that was printed by Darul Noor a couple of years ago called Is'af al-Mawla al-Qadir, which is what? It's a sharh of Zadul Faqir. What's Zadul Faqir? It's a matan on Ibadat by Al-Kamal ibn Humam, and the author is unknown, right? So we're going to class works like this based on the other factors. If you don't know who the author is, then automatically it calls into question. However, there are works where the author might be unknown, but the quality of the work can speaks for itself. So works like this are eventually they will be categorized. But what we say is, if the work support is in agreement with and in support of the Maqbool books, and they're all in agreement, then we're going to put you can put it in that, and you just istitnas with that. You don't rely on it completely. For example, it's Afil Mawla Qadir. If you study the ibadat, you want to open it up and you want to read it, great. Any benefit you take from it, any deepening of insight, great. But if it's going against what the other works of the school are saying, then you have to understand where the priorities lie when it comes to tarjih and these matters, right? Okay, so now let's look at what makes a text pass beyond the realm of acceptance, right? So you've got works that unfortunately are unreliable. So why would they be unreliable? The state of the author is unknown, right? That is the first thing. So we have, for example, a text called Mullah Miskin, right? That's what they call it, right? Wafi Miskin, right? Ibn Abdin says. So Mullah Miskin was a faqih al-Harawi, around the year 900 something, but we don't know who he is, what his caliber was in fiqh, in fatwa, in understanding of the school. So he wrote a book, and because this question on, so what I'm saying is, I could, for example, you could find a text which copies out the Masail of Al-Quduri, and you could have someone that's saying, this is what's correct in the Hanafi school, and he puts it down. But then you compare it to Bidayat al-Mujtahid, not that text, Bidayat al-Mubtadi by Imam al-Marghinani, and they might be saying the same thing, but whose words have more weight? The words of Imam al-Marghinani, without a doubt. And sometimes you will have, there might be agreement, but on one little qaid or on one little fara', Imam al-Marghinani might take something else, and this person might take something else, right? So just because they've said the same thing in most of the text doesn't mean the texts have the same value. So you're going to go back to the value of this mujtahid, this faqih, who's, and so the rank of someone like, as I think you can probably say, I have immense esteem for Imam al-Marghinani, and rightly so. Honestly, his work is a work of wonder, right? Radiallahu anhu wa ardah. And so not knowing who the author is, or what his caliber is, in a sense, almost anyone can write a book for it, but writing a book with authority, with skill, with insight, with expertise is a different matter, right? So that's one thing, right? Not knowing the state of the author. Next is, you could also add to that doubt as to who has authored this work. Is it the person who they're saying has authored this, or is it not, right? For example, um, Imam Abdul-Hayy al-Laknawi is talking about, I was reading earlier, he was talking about a particular work, Al-Jalabi, right? Or Al-Chalabi, I don't know how you say his name, right? But so Al-Jalabi, this author has got a number of works, and Imam Al-Laknawi says that all of his works is tahqiq, and he's just amazing. But there's a particular work ascribed to him. He says it's not his, clearly, because it doesn't have that same level of competency that his other works that we know are his, right? So the same thing, either it's the authors are known, or the author might be known supposedly, but there's no sihh of this isnad to this book, or someone's written by, for example, Ibrahim al-Halabi. There's two people, which one wrote it, right? Someone could say, Abdullah ibn Ahmad, right? Imam Nasifi, that's his name. But how likely is it that there's a scholar called Abdullah ibn Ahmad? Very likely, right? So, unless the nisbah is absolutely established to the mu'allif, then there's an issue. And then we have brevity to the point of being a hindrance. Now, you have. So this is something that's common in, for example, in the works of Al-Imam Alauddin Al-Haskafi, and what an amazing scholar he was. Imam Haskafi was amazing, and as I said, Imam Ibn Abidin has a deep attachment to him, right? He commented on a lot of his works, and so Imam Al-Haskafi, and I mean, his works are difficult to read because they're so brief, right? So what someone else would expand in, say, 4 sentences, he might just give a short sentence on it, 2 short sentences. And this, I believe, is down to his intelligence, right? When he read something, he understood so much more from it than someone who hasn't read it, right? For example, I'll give you an example. Let's just take a basic text. If you take Maraqi Sa'adat, right, by Imam Ashur-Bulali, and if you just read the opening paragraph in Kitab al-Tahara, right, someone that hasn't studied fiqh will just read it and think, okay, yeah, and if you ask them to list out how many actual points that have been made directly or indirectly, they might say 5 or 6. Someone that has studied it might pull out 30 points, right? Someone who understands fiqh, because of, it's not just about what's said, it's about what's not said, and there's a whole style of doing this. But sometimes a text is mukhtasar to the point where they say al-mukhil is a hindrance to proper understanding. So is the book worthless? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. When we say a book is ghair mu'tamad, unreliable, and understand this point, we're saying you cannot take fatwa from it, right? Unless in this situation where you go and you double check with one of its commentaries. If you check the shuruh and the point you've understood is what's being said, great. Give a fatwa and reference this work. But otherwise you can't. Another book that's like this is Al-Ashbah wal-Nadha'ir by Ibn Nujaym. If you want to reference a point from it, then what do? You go to its shuruh, right? Ghamz Uyun al-Basair, you go to the Umdat Dhawi al-Basair by Reasat, the excellent work. Both of them are excellent works. And so you go to the shuruh and you look at what's said, to expand on these issues, right? Another thing which makes a book be categorized as unreliable is that it's rare or its manuscripts are lost. So there's a book that no one has, no one talks about, no one references, and then someone turns up and says, I've got this book, and this is the answer to this mas'ala in this book. Okay? But how do we know that that's the case? That's why, as I said, Al-Muhit Al-Burhani, Ibn Abidin didn't class it as something that's mu'tamad, because you could be quoting it, and how do we know you're quoting it correctly, or you've understood correctly? That's the whole point of a reference, so people can go check for themselves, right? And if a book's just not available, then it's an issue, right? Another issue is a lot of typos, right? And so, which is connected to this, that like a book that has so many typos that you can't rely on it, right? I mean, we've talked about publishing houses, I hinted at DKI. Unfortunately, Darul Kutub al Ilmiya, and there's a few others, Al Maktabat al Asriya, Darul Fikr. These the basis, the default is you look for the muhakkik, you look for the editor of the book, right? And some people always do a fantastic job, right? And some people, their job is acceptable, right? A good tahqiq is where the text is all there, and that's the bare minimum. As for voweling, whatever, not really interested, right? You shouldn't be reading the book if you can't do the i'rab of the vowels. um, but then there are other useful matters. So for example, if you have, say, Tanwir al-Absar, for example, right? I bought an edition of Tanwir al-Absar. It's accurate, it's good, all the text is there. But clearly someone's reading this because there's a benefit in having the matan separate from the sharh and the hashia. And and the sharh has discussions on points of the matan, and the hashia discussions on the points of the sharh and the matan. So it would be very useful. Unfortunately, it's not in this print, but it'd be very useful to save whoever is studying, teaching, referencing these works, for the editor to look at. Okay, it's more work, but to look at what the conclusions are in the sharh and the hashia to these discussions, and just point them out, highlight them in footnotes. It's much more useful than saying, from a teaching and learning perspective, or even answering questions perspective, that I use 5 manuscripts. This manuscript had ala, and this one had fi, and this one had. Excellent. Allah reward you for your hard work, but what will give greater benefit to someone that wants to benefit from these books properly is what I've mentioned, some addition. And yes, you could say, well, just go yourself and look it up. You can, but the whole point of having separate works and all of these things is to streamline the process, right? So it's like that. So sometimes the additions are just a big issue. One of the books that's famous for this is Al-Binaya Sharh al-Hidayah by Imam al-Aini. He's a faqih, mu'tabar, someone who understands fiqh, excellent. Unfortunately, there are a number of prints of this book, and they're full of mistakes. It's been like that for a while. Although I did, there's an edition. There's 2 editions. There's a new one which I haven't seen, but it's been published in Turkey, and there's an edition. I think it's called Al-Maktabat al-Haqqaniya, right? I have a Pakistani print of it, which it's a reliable, I have it on good authority. It's a reliable edition. That this is, with the exception of this Turkish edition, we don't know about yet, the new one. Now this is a reliable edition. It's worth getting, and the text, is soundly narrated. But if you look at one of my friends, Sheikh Wasim, we studied together in Jordan, and I went to his flat, and he had he had a copy of Al-Binaya, or was it Al-Kifaya? Anyway, so I opened it up, and literally there's page after page where you look, where there's whole sections of the text missing, right? And then, like, there's a bit where there's brackets, and then dot 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 dot, and then brackets close, and you think, where's the text, right? So, and then that's when the editor has enough academic integrity to actually highlight that there's something missing. Sometimes they just carry on, right? And so it's the addition matters a lot, and then, okay, then we have someone who narrates weak positions, like Al-Quhustani, right? Al-Zahidi, right? These scholars that you might see, some of the ulama like Ibn Abidin, he quotes from them, but you can understand that if he quotes something from it, he's done the relevant background research to know that what he's quoting is sound, right? Or if he just says waqil, waqil, waqil. So for example, you'll have a lot of these people I've seen a number of people. Someone once had to go at me. You know, for example, in these books of Fada'il, Al-A'mal, right, and other books on the Sun, you know. So what they'll do is they'll mention these weak positions from all of these books, but they mention them as if they're, divinely inspired. So, for example, do you have to stand when the adhan is being called? Stop talking. These sorts of things. You have to sit. There's a whole number. Waqil, 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 waqil. That's what the fuqaha will mention. And for example, I remember that I think it's Kohastani. He's got a position that when you shake hands, it's not the standard handshake. It's where the palms go. Right, not so. I can't do it with myself, but like not like that. But it's like, like that kind of thing, right? And that's, he said, that's how the Sahaba shook hands. Is it? And the source isn't entirely accurate, right? So some of these texts they're not relied upon for fatwa, right? So and then what else was there? Was the last point. That the scholars didn't give them due attention, which rightly so, right? So let me just summarize this overarching topic that we have. That there are books that are sound and reliable for the student, for the scholar, for the researcher to go to these books to learn and understand the mas'ala, and its tafri'at. Great. Someone who's wanting to give a fatwa, you refer to these works, great, no problem at all. Whatever's in there is the position. Then there are other works which, when it comes to fatwa, this is what we're saying, they're unreliable. This is what we mean, that when it comes to fatwa, that these works, you cannot rely on these books. You go to the other works. Some of these works they can use to support a thing, like for example we said about Ad-Durr al-Mukhtar, but you have to do further research. You can't just rely on it on its own, right? It doesn't mean that they're devoid of any benefit whatsoever. Like we said, for example, Al-Haddadi's As-Siraj al-Wahhaj, Jawharat al-Nayyira, these works have weak positions as well as sound positions. But for example, if they're doing taswir al-mas'ala, explaining an issue, giving more details around it, are they completely to be ignored? No, there are benefits, right? So one of the things here was, we can highlight some texts so that when we do come across them in the sharh, that we understand what's being said. So that's just a couple of works on this. You've got the Khulasatul Kaydani, which is a work on ibadat. We don't know who the author is, right? It's unreliable. The Sharh of Kanz al-Daqaiq by Mullah Miskin, on its own is unreliable. However, there's a 3-volume Hashia by Abu Saud, not the Mufassir, as I once thought, but Abu Saud, not the Mufassir. Al-Azhari, I believe he is, right? He's an Egyptian scholar. Excellent with the Hashia, the Khiratul Uqba, you'll actually see this quoted in the Lubab. Also a weak text. Imam Tosh Kubri Zada, he said, so this is the text that's actually mansub to Al-Jalabi, but it's actually not. So that's where Tosh Kubri Zada was incorrect on this, right? Al-Ashbah wa Nadha'ir, as a book of fatwa, is it a beneficial book on qawaid? Of course it is, right? So if there's fatwa, you have to research, you have to look at its commentaries. Ad-Durr al-Mukhtar, once again, as I mentioned. An-Nahr al-Fa'iq, this text I'm quoting from, misquoted its name, by Umar ibn Nujaym. He is the younger brother of Ibrahim ibn Nujaym, who wrote Al-Bahr al-Ra'iq, right? So An-Nahr al-Fa'iq, useful text, and useful text, but it's not for fatwa on its own, is unreliable. Ramz al-Haqa'iq by Imam Badruddin al-Aini, excellent work, just not for fatwa, but there is a lot of benefit in there. Al-Binaya, as I said, depending on the edition, most of the editions out there are a problem, so you wouldn't do that. And then you've got what else is there? Allah. There's a number that um, Imam Muhammad Amin ibn Abidin uh, he highlights, for example, Khazanatul Riwayat. It's just a weak work. The author just added this and that and everything, right? So you see Khazana, Wafil Khazana, for example. Jami'ul Rumuz by Al-Quhustani. And sometimes what they do is they mention the author's name instead of the text. So Wafil Quhustani or Fi Quhustani, right? So Jami'ul Rumuz, same, right? It's just text. You can't rely on, um, some of the ulama said that actually he wasn't even a scholar. He was a bookseller and he just used to read around and he ended up writing a text. Qunyatul Munya by Az-Zahidi. He he was a Mu'tazili of i'tiqad, but once again, what he narrates, if it contradicts any of the sounder books, it doesn't have the same strength. So it's not something you take fatwa from. You will see it quoted in works, and you can, it's either for refutal, for rebuttal, or it's to maybe mention a fa'idah, right? Something like that. Al Mujtaba, right? And which is also by Zahidi. So he says, look, Imam al-Lakhmi says, طلعت القنية والمجتبى فوجدتهما على المسائل الغريبة حاويين. I found them containing strange masail. ولتفصيل الفوائد كافيين. There you are. But in order for listing the fawaid and other beneficial points, they're sufficient. So there's goodness in these books, but you have to realize what you're taking from them, right? Al-Hawi, another book by Zahidi, also has issues. Kanzul Ubad, Shir'atul Islam. It does have ahkam fiqhiyya in it, so if they're contradicting anything that you know from the Mu'tabar books, you won't really take it. But its main issue is hadith. He has a lot of fabricated hadith. As-Siraj al-Wahhaj, Al-Jawharat al-Nayyira, by Al-Haddadi, as I mentioned. Al-Fatawa al-Sufiyya, Ibn Abidin quotes this in a few places. And Sharh al-Nuqaya by Abil Makarim. And yeah, okay, let's call it, that's sufficient. So these are the works that are most famous for not being reliable for fatwa, but could there be benefit in them? Yes. So you just make sure you grasp this point that I made. These books are not entirely without value or worth, right? Okay, so we've done this preamble, we've had this discussion, and what we'll do next week, inshallah ta'ala, we'll start with the introduction of the Lubab, and we'll go on and proceed on to the Sharh and start looking at the text. So please read the text and make sure you at least understand all the individual words. The vowels are all there and everything. So if you have an issue with Nahu, go fix that issue. We need to be able to understand the fiqh texts as fiqh texts, and they're written in the Arabic language. Someone that does, I know someone that did a cowboy job on his Arabic, and he studied a couple of beginner and intermediate books, and he had enough honesty at the end of the intermediate book to say, you know what, I don't understand this, I'm going back, right? And so if you do a cowboy job, then you're going to get cowboy results. It's as simple as that, right? So if you need to study some more Nahu, do so, right? And learn how to apply everything. Don't think that, okay, that's a side thing. No, that is a step in the process. And if that step is skipped, then you're missing an essential part of the process, right? So read the text, understand the text, and inshallah ta'ala, it'll be my job to, I'll clarify what's being said, I'll clarify the issue, and I'll break the text down, and inshallah there'll be much benefit in it for all of us and the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So let us see, are there any questions? There's only two people. um, yeah, prepare the muqaddimah and prepare on. The muqaddimah won't take long. It'll take us all 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll start the text. So keep preparing, a few pages on, and inshallah we'll take it from there. Take care. Okay then, right? Let's call it a day here, inshallah. Barakallahu fikum, and we'll continue. وجزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ما هو أهله سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.